This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
My goal here at the Art Marketing Minute is to answer your questions so that this is more about you and what you need and what you want. You can upload a question at artmarketing.com/questions, or you can email me, eric@artmarketing.com. And I love to get your questions. My producer, Amadine, from France, always reads the questions. Amadine, what have we got?
So the first question is from Sophia from Miami, Florida. Your art marketing advice is great. A problem I have is the offers received on Instagram have been from buyers that want to pay by check and do not want to pay through my website where I feel more secure. I should one know whether or not a buyer is honest and not a scam. I don't want to lose sales, but I don't want to be giving my home address or personal info to strangers. Through my website, credit cards and PayPal are accepted.
All right. Well, I think that's a really great thing. First off, you should know, Sophia, that there's a massive scam that is going around, and I get emails about once, twice a month. They're always different people, always different names, but they always say the same thing. They say, "Hey, I was looking at your website. I love your artwork, and my anniversary is coming up, and I thought I'd buy a painting for my wife. It's a surprise, and I'd like to buy that from you. Can you reach out to me and contact me, and we'll work it out?" So the way that scam works, the way I understand it, I may have it wrong. First off, they oftentimes send you a check, and sometimes that check is just not a legitimate check, but they want you to ship that painting. So the first thing to think about is it's probably a scam. If it feels like a scam, it's probably a scam. Secondly, is if they're paying by check, you want to make sure that you go to the bank and that you hammer that check. In other words, you get it cashed beforehand. And you also need to find out from the bank what happens if the check ends up not being good. Does it come back on you? What does that work? I think the scam is that they actually send you a check, you actually cash the check, and they send you a check for too much money, and then you end up going, wait a minute, you sent too much money, and then you send a check back somehow. And I'm not exactly sure how it works, but what I do whenever I get these, I forward them to the FBI. There's a email you can forward them to. FBI probably doesn't have time to look into it, but they've got their own issues. But I think you want to just kind of probably avoid those things. Now there are going to be things that come through that are real. The trick is, if you're selling on Instagram or Facebook, you might get a private message, and the question is it real? And I'm sure these scammers are going to figure out how to do it through those. My guess is, the best thing is, if you don't want to accept checks, just don't accept them. And if you're going to lose a sale, okay, that's okay. If you want to accept checks, then maybe get a PO box, nobody knows your address, or have it mailed to a friend, or something like that. But I think the thing you got to figure out is how to get that that cash in hand, that check cashed before you ever send off the painting, and make sure, of course, you're collecting your shipping and handling costs and everything else like that. Now, the reality is, we sell a lot of paintings in a lot of different ways. Now, I'll tell you a quick story. I was in a big show in Annapolis at a gallery there, and it was from our Cuba trip, and I sold quite a few paintings in that trip, but I didn't sell them all. Well, this collector reached out to me, and he said, I was at the show, I bought a couple paintings of yours, but I would like to see what else you've got from Cuba. And so I sent him pictures of what I had from Cuba, and he said, okay, I'd like to buy that one. And so we worked out a transaction, and I don't remember how he paid for it, but so I sent it to him, and I remember when I sent it to him, I enclosed a little note, and I enclosed actual photos. Remember those? Actual photos of the other paintings. And I said, because you bought one before and because you bought this one, I will give you one of these two, or either of these two, at a 20% discount. Just let me know. He ended up buying them both. And that was pretty cool. Now, this can happen in any situation, but I look at things, I always say, look, I have someone who's interested in me. I have a buyer. how can I turn that buyer into a collector? And so you're always looking at ways. And what you oftentimes will go someplace and they'll say, hey, because you bought this, we'll give you this at a discount. That's called an upsell, and they're trying to get you to spend more money, and they're figuring, well, it's better to give them a discount now than to hope that they'll come back and pay full price. And so that's kind of the methodology behind it. So you might want to think about how you do something like that. Now, you ask about payment. I like to have PayPal, when possible, Apple Pay, when possible, lots of alternatives. There's a bunch of places now. PayPal, for instance, you can buy it and then you can make payments, and those payments, you don't have to wait for them to collect them. You get your money up front, but PayPal collects the money. And even if they don't pay, that's PayPal's problem, or somebody else's problem. So, you can do Venmo. There's a lot of different things you can do, but make it easy for people, and there are people out there. We have painttube.tv, and we still have some people who insist on paying by check. So we have our system, what I explained to you, and we just double check that, and do we get burned? Very rarely, but once in a while you do. So be very careful about that. Anyway, good question. Even though it's not specifically a marketing tactic, in terms of bringing people in the door, really all of these things about business are important, and they're important because you've got to make sure that your business is running smoothly. And my wife was telling me a story about, she took our car into the car dealer the other day and for some repair, and she said it was effortless. She walked in, they handed her the keys to the loaner. She walked back in, they handed her the keys. I mean, there was no paperwork, there was nothing. They had all that figured out in advance, and that's wonderful. I called a client the other day, my doctor actually. I called my doctor and I wanted my prescription renewed, and I didn't even have to give my name. They knew me because my phone number popped something up on the string, and on the screen, and they said, "Are you still on this percentage and this prescription?" I said, "Yes." They said, "Okay, I just clicked the button. I'll renew it. It is going to this pharmacy, right?" Yeah. Okay, Amadine, what's our next question?
Our next question is from Trey from McMinnville, Tennessee. Can you share helpful hints on mentally preparing for your first plein air paint-out competition? How to let go of insecurity and fear of not being good enough?
Well, I know Trey. Trey is a doctor, and he's a plein air painter, and he's been studying a lot with Bill Davidson. They've become great friends. As a matter of fact, he's a good friend of mine. He's become a really good painter. And because I've been watching him study relentlessly. So you probably have nothing to be worried about, Trey. But here's here's what I think. When we first started creating videos, the first one we did was Max Ginsburg, the great artist in New York. Max at the time was in his 80s, maybe I think in his 80s. And Max said to me, "I'm a little nervous." And I said, "Well, that's understandable. You're on camera, you got lights, all this other stuff." And he says, "Well, I've been practicing for 5 days." He said, I said, "Max, you've been painting for 65 years. Why do you need to practice for 5 days?" He said, "Well, within a couple of days, you lose your hand-eye coordination." He said, "You got to practice all the time." He says, "But I wanted this to be good. So I practiced portraits 5 days in a row to make sure, and I practiced talking. So I'm going to make sure that I had my act together." Trey, I think the best advice I can say to you is your confidence comes from being prepared and being practiced. I know plein air painters, if they're going to an event, let's say they're going to the Laguna plein air, they may go to Laguna 2 or 3 days before the event starts and scope out where they're going to paint and find those locations and paint smaller paintings of them, or maybe same size. And they paint them 1 or 2 times just to make sure they know the landscape and they feel good at it. And it gives them confidence. And it's a great way to make sure that you're practiced, well rehearsed. If you stop a couple of days, when I go to my event in the Adirondacks, paint the Adirondacks, and I usually haven't painted for a week or two, sometimes longer. And when I first start out, first couple of days, I'm really making a lot of mistakes. But by the third day, I'm rocking it. And all the things that, I have to remember, I'm remembering. And that's the value of practicing right before you come in. Even if you're practicing at home, just practice. It'll give you confidence. Now, nervousness, is actually a good thing. All the research says nervousness is beautiful. Now, fear and anxiety, not beautiful, but nervousness is okay because nervousness makes you grow. It makes you want to get better. It helps you, it forces you to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And when you get out of your comfort zone, that's where the real growth occurs. Now, let's talk about, you didn't ask this question, but I think this is something to think about. If you're an artist who is doing a tent show, an art show where there's a lot of tents, or you're at an outdoor art show, or you're in an art show in a auditorium for Christmas or something, or you're at a plein air paint out, here's some things that you can do. First off, if you're at plein air paint outs, they all have rules, and there's certain things you have to do. um, there's a lot of stuff going around about people who are breaking those rules, and everybody knows who they are, and I've even been asked to do articles and been given names. Now, I would never do that to somebody, but there are people who abuse the systems. And so, for instance, there are a couple of people who went to plein air paintouts, and as you know, at plein air paintouts, they stamp the back of your canvas so you can prove it was painted there, not pre-painted. And a couple of artists actually glued those panels over another panel and put them in a frame that they had pre-painted and tried to get away with it, but got caught. And so they've been asked never to attend another event. And by the way, they tell everybody else, and then those people say that I'm not bringing this person in. So your reputation is everything. So don't do stuff like that. Don't play games like that. It's just not worth it. The other thing is pricing is really important. And there are people who go into these events and they look around and they say, okay, I'm going to price my stuff at half of what everybody else does. And they get all the sales and nobody else gets any sales. And then, it's good for you, but the reality is you've destroyed your reputation. You got to be part of the team. And so be careful about stuff like that. But in terms of when you're at an event, here's what I look at. First off, I'm at an event and I have, let's say, 5,000 people coming through the event. And there's, 30, 40, 50 painters there, or booths or otherwise. And how do I get them to pay attention to me? Because I've got to stop them in their tracks long enough to get them to pay attention. Because you're walking through an art show and you're just kind of, your eyes are darting around, and then something grabs your attention and you stop and you look. Now, at that point, then the point at which they stop and look, you need some kind of an engagement mechanism. What is an engagement mechanism? The goal is you've got to get them to go deeper, right? You either want to get them inside your booth, you want to have a chance to talk to them, or you want to figure out how to get them to contact you or to get their email information. There are a lot of different ways you can do that. Now, I used to teach people how to do trade show booths because I was expert at that. And a simple trick is I would put a bowl of wrapped candy with a little sign says free, help yourself. And I'd put it inside the booth at the back of the booth, but you could see it from the front. And people would walk in and they'd take a piece of candy. Now, there's a thing called the law of reciprocity. And it's kind of like, well, now they feel a little obligated to pretend to be interested, and you get a chance to talk to them for a minute. And sometimes just that 1 minute is an opportunity to kind of switch them and get them to think about something or get them interested. So, look for little things like that. Now, how do you stop traffic? Well, in a plein air show, it's about being different. If everybody else is doing the same kind of painting, what can you do that's not the same kind of painting? And so, that's why a lot of the people who are doing more abstract, more colorful, more different approaches at plein air events, like Lon Brower or Laurie Putnam and so on. I don't think Laurie does those events anymore, but I think the idea is that they really stand out. And so that helps them get attention. So what can you do to stand out? Another thing, it's an old gallery trick, but it's very effective. Galleries know that if you have a great big painting that you see through the window, it really grabs attention and then draws them in. So can you do a great big painting and hang that up? And yeah, the bigger paintings are more expensive and they may or may not sell. But the idea is you want to draw people to your booth. And so if you have a really great big painting of the town that you're in, first off, somebody's probably going to buy it. But secondly, it'll draw people in. So use something to draw people in. Now, if you're at a tent show, you can't do stuff like this at a plein air event. But if you're at a tent show, you could have something outside of your tent to grab people's attention. Maybe it's a giant skeleton with something dressed in a funny way with a funny sign. Maybe it's something that people want to get their picture taken in front of for Instagram or Facebook. And you want to make sure that your signage is in there so it'll be seen when they're getting their picture, and that'll help you virally. But it also it also gives them your name. And if your paintings are kind of in that picture and they take a picture and maybe they saw you at the tent show and they walked on and they don't remember your name, which happens all the time. Now they go through their photos, they go, oh, there's Eric Rhoads. That's the guy that had that painting. And, now they go to your Instagram and now they figure out how to reach you, direct message you, et cetera. So there are a lot of techniques about stopping traffic. So look for something to put on your booth. The other thing that's really a great idea is first off, I like big signage that's up above people's heads that gets people's attention, and get a QR code on there and give them an incentive, right? So, get my free book of all my paintings. Just scan this QR code. They scan the QR code. They put their email in. You send them the book of your paintings automatically, but now you've got their email address so you can market to them. They may or may not be interested. There's a whole chapter on that in my book where you can kind of go into that kind of a thing. Now, once you get their email addresses, there's a process, and you want to be respectful of them. But you can get their email addresses through a QR code. You can get them through a visitor book, which is kind of old school. You can do a drawing where they can win something, a painting or a prize or print or something. And the best way for the drawing is just the QR code. Win this painting, scan here, and now you're getting their email address. And you give away a $50 print. It's not a big deal, and you get their name and email. If you live in that town and you're marketing to that town, it's always a good thing. But even if you're looking for a way to get to plein air collectors, throw a QR code with a message in a frame and put it up with your paintings if you're allowed, and that's a really good way. Now, how do I get people to buy if I'm in a live environment? The first thing I want to say is I don't like manipulation. In the old days, car dealers, they're manipulative people. I don't like that. There is training that teaches you some things you can do to engage people. And, you've got to get them out of their I'm not interested mode. And so it's not manipulation, it's engagement. The first thing is never be dishonest. You've got to tell the truth all the time. The second thing is always ask questions. If somebody comes up to you and talks to you for a minute, have 3 or 4 questions in your mind that you can ask people, and just to get them, to keep them there longer. The more they talk to you, the more chance you have of selling them. And because they're always like, guard up, I'm not interested. And so you just say, hey, do you have any original paintings in your house? And they'll say, well, no, I never had one. And then you can say, say something about that, and then ask another question, and so on. But some people are intimidated by original paintings. So you can talk about that a little bit, but you can kind of guide them in, but ask questions. The second thing is you can look for ways to create what's called scarcity and what is called urgency. So scarcity and urgency, like, somebody's looking at a painting. Now, don't say this if it's not true, but if somebody's looking at a painting, you can go, you're the third person today who's been interested in that painting. A lot of people have said they might come back. I don't know if they will or not, but it's kind of interesting that something about this painting is really resonating with people. It's subtle. You don't have to say, you better buy it now. You don't have to say that. They're like, oh, maybe if I want this, I better grab it. You don't have to say anything more. You just want to plant a seed. Or you can say, hey, if you like that, if you want to hold it to make sure nobody else takes it, while you look through the show, I can take a $50 deposit or something, and then you can come back for it. But I can only hold it for 30 minutes because I don't want to lose the sale. But that might be enough to pull them back. They're going to at least come back for their money. Another thing you can do is find ways to talk about your credibility or show that people have interest in you. And that is, this funny thing about that painting. I painted that painting. And the great art historian Jean Stern came by here the other day, and he said this about the painting. Now all of a sudden, you're building the credibility of you and the credibility of the painting. And if you look for ways you can build your credibility when you're having a dialogue with them without being braggy, I'm modestly, you can say, I'm really excited because, Plein Air magazine just did this article about me. And I think that's really, it seems like ever since then, my paintings have been selling to more collectors, things like that will give you credibility. Now, we all have to, we're a little uncomfortable with those things, and you have to decide what you're comfortable with. Again, I don't want you being false or lying or manipulating. In terms of scarcity, you can make it scarce, a way to make it scarce is, and again, tell the truth. But you could say, hey, it's funny. My wife told me that if this painting doesn't sell, that we're going to keep it in our personal collections because she thinks it's one of the best I've ever done. Well, that could backfire. They might say, well, you should sell it to your wife, but you might also, they might say, well, maybe this is good, or you might look for other ways to make it scarce. Like, I've sold all my paintings today. This is the last one I've got. My shows are selling out like crazy. I don't know what's going on, but I'm really happy about it. And boom, or these are the last two or something. And then look for credibility builders, like putting up the ribbons if you want an award, or putting up a large copy of an article of you in Plein Air magazine or something. That will help. Anyway, I hope these have been helpful to you. That's today's Art Marketing Minute.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.